Mr. Minister, thank you very much for being with us here this evening and for agreeing to release the book, almost in some ways in the second time, because of the iteration and the history of this volume. I promised the minister that when we had this conversation, I would not vex him with more questions about India, Russia, Ukraine, and oil purchases. I intend to keep that promise. I want to focus the conversation this evening on the role of ideas in the making of India's rise as an emerging great power. And so let me ask you for a personal reflection, to start the conversation with a personal reflection. You've had a professional career that has taken you all the way from the erstwhile Soviet Union to Eastern Europe, to Sri Lanka, to Singapore, and to the United States. And you've done it with Japan and China thrown in. And you've done this at a time when the world itself has been in dramatic transformation and flux. So when you think back about this long and storied career, what would you reflect upon as being the principles that India employed or the objectives that India sought to achieve in its dealings with all these countries?
Okay. Actually, before I answer your question, first of all, let me congratulate you and Bibek and Raj on the book. I got the book 48 hours ago. I attempted some speed reading. And, you know, I really want to say something as a generic proposition regarding this book. Very often, when it comes to foreign policy, diplomacy, people tend to be very prescriptive in a very narrow sense. Okay. The interesting thing about this book, which I liked, was you kind of organized it with a vision, which is your chapter, with a set of articles which deal actually with the foundation, the base on which Indian foreign policy can or cannot deliver or partially deliver. So it's a kind of infrastructure to the superstructure of the diplomacy. Then looked at capacities. And I mention that because it's not often that any analysis of foreign policy tends to look at capacities. Then looked at the footprint. So, you know, what is it you've done? What is it you want to do? And finally, there's Raj's piece about the, in a sense, the terms of engagement. So my very, very sort of quick feedback, I mean, as your marketing agent to all of them, you know, it's actually a different book, because I'll tell you one thing very frustrating as a policymaker. You know, to get advice from people who are completely divorced from the realities of capacities with the realities of your situation. You know, who will advocate, go do this, do that, confront this person, this country, take that posture. It can be quite annoying, you know. So to get something which is actually grounded, and in that sense, I mean, to my mind, the big thought I had, and I know I'm straying from your question, is it's particularly important in a sense to have a much more multidisciplinary approach to the prospects of countries and to the prospects, to the diplomatic and foreign policy prospects of countries. Because if you don't have it, I think a lot of that, you know, aspiration is frankly empty talk. Now, having got that out of the way, you know, your question, what over the years, what in a sense are the enduring principles? I would sort of put it to you on a kind of XYZ axis. I think one part of what is enduring is a kind of ambition for India, that the x-axis, you have to relentlessly look at the international situation and say, okay, where is the space for me to keep growing? Okay. The y-axis, in a way, is the capacities. Because people don't realize how often capacities constrain choices. If you look at economic capacities, military capacities, even nuclear capacities, the exercise of our nuclear options were often capacity determined. And it's not like, the Chinese tested in 64, so why didn't you test immediately afterwards? Or the NPT got done, so why didn't you test? I mean, there was a very good reason why the first test was 74. It was a capacity influenced decision. It wasn't entirely a policy influenced decision. And in all of this, of course, there's the y-axis, which is between ambition and capacity. How do you keep growing your space? That independence, so I would say, maximizing your space, sharp elbows as you go up. How do you do that? Now, that's the kind of a big picture way. But then there's the statecraft side to it. And the statecraft side to it, the enduring side, is constantly how do you manage to harmonize or reconcile or somehow, in some way optimize the short term and the long term. The short term often puts pressures on you. You do not want your short-term pressures to endanger your long-term goals. You do not want your long-term ambitions to actually get you into short-term problems. So that's the diplomatic bit. But the constant bit is really, if a country like India, if it's drilled into you, which it was into me, that, look, you're born in a country, this country has prospects, we're going to go up, this is what your life is about, you have to keep taking it up, and that has to keep you going, and in many ways, frankly, that has been the enduring principle.
And would it be fair to say that today, 30, 40 years after you first joined the Foreign Service and started doing this business, 45 years after you joined the Foreign Service, would it be fair to say that today India's margins for maneuver have increased considerably, and that the pressures that you identified, either structural constraints on India's ambitions or the capacity constraints, where would you judge India on that path? How much maneuver does India have today? What are the prospects for increased maneuver, say, over the next 10 to 15 years?
Oh, absolutely. I think the maneuvering space has increased because capacity has increased. The footprint has grown. The ability to influence the environment and other players has grown. But it's also balanced to some degree with more interests. And every interest has not a vulnerability, but a certain anxiety or a sort of a desire to defend that interest or advance that interest. The other change is also that the more you grow, there's the Newton's third law of politics. Your competitors will react with greater shall I say, sense of purpose. So you will draw upon yourself much more attention and possibly more than attention in that. So at one level, I mean, I would say it's more less worrisome existence if you are less of a player at one level. I mean, you have different worries. You have the worries of a lesser player.
Sure.
But as you go up the ladder, it's not like your worries come down. Different kinds of, not worries, but I would say calculations and, sort of thought processes. And that, as I said, I mean, this is an infinite, endless game of rising. So how do you keep going up? I mean, every day you ask yourself, where am I, what's going to come tomorrow, what's going to come next week, what's going to come next month, how do I prepare, have I done better? That's really what it is about.